I've worked with a lot of technology people and just a lot of business people who think emotions are just like a problem in business. Like, I wish we could just get rid of them. You may be able to, you should know, begin back to awareness. Where are you in each of those four? Where are your strengths and where are you not as strong? And then surround yourself with people who make up for the differences. You can stretch and get a little more creative, but you're never going to be as creative as that really super creative person. So just bring them in the room, make them part of the team. Identity blind spots happen when your identity and your role are not well aligned. And this often happens when people get promoted.
Marty, welcome to the Made Leader podcast. I'm so glad to have you on today.
Thank you, Jen. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Well, let's get started with your intro. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
I've had a varied career as a clinical psychologist by training, and had did a little bit of teaching, a little bit of community mental health, and then had a private practice, adult psychotherapy practice for a while. And then healthcare started changing, and I've always been interested in business at some level. So I got curious about the kind of business side of healthcare, behavioral health, and started a company with a couple of colleagues that we grew to a good size and ended up selling to a Fortune 50 company. So I was a CEO for about 15 years. And then after that, after we sold, I worked for the acquiring company for a little while as part of my earnout. And then I really kind of wasn't sure what to do next. And I found this whole area of where psychologists consult the business. So I did that for the last portion of my career with a couple firms that exclusively have psychologists who are consulting to business leaders.
I love it. I think much needed in the business world, and glad you could take your talents in many different directions, of course. But Marty, when you think about leadership in general, and especially the lens that you've worn recently, what is the biggest lie we tell people about leadership?
Oh, biggest lie we tell people. Well, I think the biggest lie maybe is that the leader is the hero, and has all the answers and has all the responsibility on their shoulders, and I think it has a bad effect on the leader, who then buys that same kind of message, and it then creates people feeling they can't be vulnerable, or they can't say they don't know something. So all those things get in the way of us being, I think, authentic and who we are. And everything in business is done by a team, by an organization, by a lot of hands. So I think that's probably the biggest lie that has, deleterious consequences.
Yes, yes, it is. That is definitely the case, especially as you go higher and higher, right? You're the hero of the organization, and no one can question you, and it just gets reinforced unless you have the mindset more of a guide than a hero. So that's a common one. Another common myth, I don't know if it's a myth, is that we need to lean into our strengths. So this is what is fascinating about your work. And just as an aside, Gallup has strengths finders, and there are people and organizations that lean heavy into strengths. And over the years, as I've talked about this, my husband's always been like, yeah, but can't they be bad too? Like, at what point do we over correct on our strengths? So that's what fascinates me about your work. And why and when does it become a problem to lean too hard on our strengths?
Yeah, so I discovered this kind of connection between strengths and kind of the other side of the coin of a strength. The typical thing is a coach and assesses to do a 360, interview people around the leader, and however you do that, things kind of fall into two buckets. What are the strengths and what are the opportunities for the person to get better? And when I would sit down with the leader with that, they'd say, yeah, those are my strengths. I don't care about that. Let's just talk about, where I can be better. And after a while, I started realizing that if I thought deeply about the adjectives that people were using to describe the leader, often the problems were the flip side of the strength, or an overuse of the strength, or not knowing when the strength doesn't apply, what kind of situations or people is it a problem. And so I started to really see the connection between them, and that really informed how I started to work with leaders much more in the part of let's talk about just the question you asked: when your strengths work for you 90% of the time, 95%. They've gotten you where you are. There's something that you're really proud of. But can we start to look at when they are working against you? What are the triggers that could get you to be aware of that? What are the people or situations when that becomes a problem?
So what do you say about people that just say, "Hey, just let's focus on strengths and forget about the weaknesses"? It sounds like it's a little bit of both. It's still focusing on your strengths to say, yes, use those, but it's like, hey, there's situations that's actually gonna get you quote unquote in trouble.
Yeah, I think there's a couple really good advantages of it. One is nobody really likes to talk about weaknesses. And quite frankly, some weaknesses are just, they are what they are, and there isn't too much you can do about it. And so I think that I think was in some ways why Gallup and others have focused on the strengths as an area to kind of work on. But I found that it is an easy entree to problems that you have, opportunities to get better by actually staying with the strengths and looking at when they're a problem. And the simple thing I say to people to get them to kind of focus on it, I say, so tell me what some of your strengths are and as a leader. Oh, I'm really decisive, or I'm really confident, or I'm really creative. And I said, okay, let's take and add the modifier, the word TOO. What happens when you're too confident? What happens when you're too creative? What happens when you're too organized? What happens when you're too decisive? And then I get a chuckle and they say, yeah, my spouse tells me that all the time, that I'm, too decisive and I need to gather more information, or I jump to a decision too quickly. So it gets people to begin to think about the fact that those strengths really can be overplayed.
I think it's particularly confusing sometimes when leaders are hired for a specific
Yeah.
strength, right? And they're like, well, I'm using it. I'm very detail oriented. So I like that you put the two in front of it. Um, because I was just also talking to a leader who is a big champion for change. And it's what the team needs. But when you just said two, I was like, yeah, I could see how some people on her team, her peers, would regard her as a little bit too much and not hearing their slowdown, like not being able to slow down to let people catch up.
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, and just that awareness that maybe change is the right thing, and they got hired for that, and that's what they need to be doing. But just that point, pace of change, the steps to get sequencing of the change, all sorts of things, need to be modified to the people that you're working with and around. And the other part about this is, I think it helps leaders not feel like they're being judged, quite frankly, because it's like you are who you are and it works for you 90% of the time. Nothing, everything, too much chocolate's a bad thing too. So like everything, too much of any good thing is bad. Let's just figure out, when it is, and when you can be aware of when it starts to become a problem. What are the cues
Yes.
you can begin to take?
Yeah. And before we walk into that, because I want to understand how do people become aware of these, but you wrote a book about six blind spots. So can you walk us through that
Sure.
framework?
Yeah. So what we're talking about right now in terms of the strengths, I tend to be the traits. So I have 6 areas for people to look at in terms of trying to really understand. It's a self-awareness model, and my book is about self-awareness. And when I was coaching people, and other people would ask me, what do you do as a coach? I mean, what is that all about? And I had long explanations for a while, and then I realized it's just simply I'm helping people become more self-aware. Everything you do as a leader is expressed through your personality. So you and I could read a book on leading a good team meeting and take away the same 5 skills that we need to do, and you'll apply them differently than I will, just based on our own personality. And you'll stress some and not stress others, and I'll do the same. And so really knowing that about yourself is how you really can elevate your leadership significantly. So the 6 areas are, I think about your readers or your listeners can think about it as a 3 circles, almost like a target. The outside circle has behaviors and identity, and they're on the outside because those are the 2 that change the most and can be changed the most. The middle circle is got 3, and it has your intellect, your traits we just were talking about, and your emotions. pretty much hardwired. You can make some changes around the edges and so on, but those three areas are pretty hardwired. And then in the kind of the target middle is your motives. That's the engine in the system. That's what drives us to do what we do, is what's motivating us, what is important, that's a need that needs to be satisfied. And there's different blind spot areas in different blind spots in each of these 6 areas that I focus on in the book, and kind of walk people through trying to understand how those 6 are different. But they're all just common language. I think intuitively you know what obviously all 6 of those words mean, and that's pretty much what I meant by them in the book.
Okay, so walk me through emotions, because emotions to me, when you talked about on the outer layer, right, you got behaviors and identity, they're the most changeable. And so we'll dig into those in a minute. But you talked about the intellect, the traits, and the emotions. And so obviously intellect, you can change so much, but tell me more about emotions and how
Yeah.
you consider those.
Yeah, so similar to, I think, books on EQ and that whole arena, I talk about 5 emotional mastery, and you have to master 5 kind of layers. So I think about those in kind of as a foundational layer, and each layer is more sophisticated. So the foundational layer is emotional bandwidth, and that is your awareness of emotions in general. Some people have a very constricted emotional awareness, mad, sad, glad. That's about it. Other people see gradations of color in between all of those and everything else, and can talk about fine differences in emotion. So if you're starting out with a pretty narrow emotional base of awareness, it's hard for you to get much more mastery beyond that. So that's the first one. And there's lots of exercises that people can do to become more astute of emotions. I mean, you can just watch a movie and, instead of just saying, oh, they were sad, to try to really, get in touch with, it was sorrow, or it was regret, or what really was going on, and getting more of an emotional bandwidth. Then the next layer up is awareness of your own emotions. And sometimes we're very aware. Oftentimes we're aware after the fact. I don't know why I got so angry then, or why I was irritated, or why I cried at that movie. And so that's the next level, is to get aware of your own emotions. The best is aware when they're happening, for you to be able to label them and understand them. Once you label that emotion, you've already started to manage it. It isn't as uncontrollable. And that's the third step, is your own emotional mastery. And I think I've worked with a lot of technology people, and just a lot of business people, who think emotions are just like a problem in business. Like, I wish we could just get rid of them. I've tell some of the engineering people, I said, emotions are just data. And if you're trying to convince somebody that you have a good argument here, and you're ignoring all the emotional parts of that whole thing, and you're unaware of your emotions, and you're unaware of other people's emotions, then you're ignoring an entire data set. How smart is that? So that layer is kind of your emotional awareness of yourself, and then your emotional mastery. And when you're able to use your emotions, you can really begin to be able to be much more decisive and strategic about how you show up. We can talk about that also. And then the next layer up is awareness of other people's emotions, empathy, reading the room, saying the right thing that really will move a conversation along, because you're sensitive to what the other person is feeling. Hugely important in negotiations. And the final is the really strategic use of emotions, and understanding the downstream impact of emotions. You as a leader might want to, pound your fist on the table, when you're at a meeting, because you're strategically deciding, I want people to know I really care about this. And maybe you're a calm person 90% of the time. People take note, and you're doing that strategically because you want everybody in that room to go now tell everybody else, Jen pounded the table the other day when she was talking about X. I think we really better pay attention to it. So you're thinking about that in that kind of way, with emotion all the way downstream.
Gotcha. So you categorize that the emotions piece is the same as intellect, meaning, like when you think about emotional intelligence, it's a skill and can be built. So do you see that the same, as these emotions can be worked on, and you do have that data set
Right.
of mad, sad, glad, but it can be worked on if they see that as a blind spot.
Yeah. So with the whole book and everything I work, it's, awareness and then action. So blind spots happen when you're not aware. So if you're not aware of those 5 levels and you're not aware of where you are at any one of those levels, that's the first step, is getting aware. And then the next step is trying to make some changes and get better. Sometimes it is hardwired and you can't. And maybe, you've now, instead of just 3, you're up to 7 emotions. And you really can't get too much further than that. Well, you can have somebody next to you or in the meeting, help you and signal, or afterwards talk with somebody who can help you understand things better. And that's often the case with the intellect. I talk about 4 kinds of intellect. And this is just, again, my experience working with lots of leaders. And the smartest person is not always, the smartest leader in the room. And some people over-index on their intellect, and we as a society do that all through school and so on. So I call that type of intellect horsepower, the ability to really analyze a lot of data, hold a lot of information in your head, manipulate them around, be able to come up with conclusions. So that's that kind of real horsepower. Another type of intellect that I've seen is speed of processing. Some people are just in the moment. They are able to be very facile, come up with an analysis. The horsepower one may need to go back and pull out their spreadsheets and think about it a little bit more to come up with an answer. The processing person, who are great in often in negotiations and in interpersonal conflict, because they can just respond very quickly. The third is creativity. Some people just see connections nobody else sees, and they can be. If people don't recognize that that's creativity and that that's super valuable, they can be just seen as kind of distracting and annoying. Like, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Why are you bringing that up? But if it's a leader, a team leader, and saying, I need a creative person in the room, and when this person says something, I need to not, even though I can't see it and I'm a little annoyed that they're bringing that up, I need to say something like, I don't see the connection there. You must see something. What's going on? And often those are, really aha moments for a team. And then the final is kind of a bit of a catch-all, but it's some people are just street savvy, is what I call. They kind of head on a pivot. They're noticing everything all the time, and they're taking in all sorts of data, and they really, are just in the moment. Really, that's the person you want on your camping trip, that'll be able to solve the problems and all of that. And again, they may not be the highest horsepower or the fastest processing, but they're coming up with information. And so you may be able to, you should know, begin back to awareness. Where are you in each of those 4? Where are your strengths and where are you not as strong? And then surround yourself with people who make up for the differences. You can stretch and get a little more creative, but you're never going to be as creative as that really super creative person. So just bring them in the room, make them part of the team.
I think it goes back to what you said about being a hero. I mean, you cannot be really good at spreadsheets and really good creatively and really good interpersonally. Like, everyone's got those different strengths to add, which is the beauty of a team, and stacking your team to where you have those different strengths. So
Yes.
I think it's a big piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've done a lot of work with entrepreneurs and startups, and those, through regular traditional companies, you start to get more well-rounded, and you try to get better in all those different areas, like you mentioned. But again, you're still going to have limitations.
Thinking about leaders and knowing that they're not going to be perfect in everything, 90% of their strengths, but there is that 10% that they may need to be more aware of. So, how do leaders become aware of their blind spots? And I'll ask you a little bit of another question too. Are there any early warning signs that they may want to start paying attention to?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think the different blind spots are, some are caused by different situations in certain areas. So, but to your question about, there are blind spots in identity, and this is one you can begin to think about ahead of time. So our identity is the name tag we wear. It's when you fill in the blank, I am blank, So you introduce yourself to people at a cocktail party or at a business meeting, and how do you describe your profession and your role and what you do? And it says a lot. I mean, if you talk about your role, or you talk about the company, or you talk about what you're good at, all of those are signaling different things about what your identity is. Um, and Identity blind spots happen when your identity and your role are not well aligned. And this often happens when people get promoted. If you just even think about that first promotion, when you're a subject matter expert, you're a marketing guru, and then you get promoted to now run a team of marketers. And if your identity still stays with it makes me feel good about being the subject matter expert in marketing. And I'm reading more and more about marketing and getting better and better at that. And I'm not reading about how do you manage a team and how do I think about what all my team members need and how do I get them working well together. You're then not aligning your identity with your new role, and when doing that, there probably should be some sense of grief and loss of the previous role because, for the most part, you probably were good at it. And that's why you got promoted to the next level. And so those identity blind spots, that blind spot in that identity area, people can prepare for, to your question about timing. They can think about it ahead of time. And I want to move into this next role. What's that like? What's the new suit of clothes that I need to put on for that role, and begin to kind of do that. And when they get into that new role, be aware of what do they need to let go of from their previous identity, and how does that identity need to shift?
Yeah, I love that one because I work with a lot of early leaders, and it is letting go of the identity of the expert. And it's so tough for them to play coach now that, they don't get all the kudos they used to get, and they're used to also going faster. They know the role really well. And then to move to say, no, my team needs to do it is really tough for them. So I love that you talked about just letting go of it. And
And they need to find what satisfaction is in that new role, right? Feeling good about how much growth there is in their team, or that the team can do it way better than they could do as an individual. And then there are people that just try in that new role and it doesn't fit for them. And then they really do, have a really important kind of, this goes to motive. Really, what does drive them? And if that kind of personal achievement is what the main driver is, and that comes from being the expert and really getting good at something, then they really do need to think about, is the management track and leadership track really the right thing for them, or they need to have a real kind of difficult discussion with themselves about their career goals.
yeah, I want to dig into motives, but going back to this identity and role. So there's that first step that happens as you're not an individual contributor anymore. I imagine at each level it's the same thing, right? So if you're going from a director to a VP, and then of course to the C-suite, they're all different mindsets and different frameworks you need.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you need to embrace this sense of leadership. I mean, there's a whole science of leadership, right? Just like there's a science of marketing or whatever the subject matter expertise is, and you want to really get better at that. I guess that's the purpose of your podcast and for us to be talking today, and really embracing that. And that's where your interest should start to move. Hopefully that starts to get exciting for you and aligns for you, and you see the growth opportunities for yourself as an individual that way.
Yes. I mean, you would hope, and you would hope, and not always, right? It's not always that motive. But before we go to motives, so you were saying that maybe the easiest thing to diagnose can be the identity. So that's one step people can take is what do I need to let go of, and what do I need to prepare myself for? But you also said behaviors, and so we're not always aware of the behaviors that we have and we exude in different contexts and different scenarios. So how do you suggest new leaders figure that part out?
Yeah. So, I mean, that identity and behavior exist on this outer ring because we can change those. So our identity changes throughout our life. We become a parent, all sorts of things change. And we can look at our behaviors. We know, we can observe, or, we walk out of a meeting and say, boy, that meeting went terrible. I need to figure out what I didn't do right or what I did wrong. And you can start to collect feedback. Feedback is super helpful, obviously, with behavior, because sometimes we can be aware of it, but we're never as fully aware of our behaviors as others who are watching us and interacting with us. So, 360s. And I really believe there's a lot of good data that comes from 360s that are done, online or so on. But the real richness of that comes from an interview, and you don't have to have a formal 360 to do that. You can just know that there's something you're working on, or something that you think you're not great at, or maybe you're aware of a trait that you over express and that becomes a problem. And so you can find somebody, to observe your behavior and give you some pointers about it. Um, and I've really found that this is not about transformation. Maybe that's another one of the lies, or it's certainly one of the words I dislike the most. People get caught up in, it sounds wonderful, but people don't transform. I've never transformed anybody, nor should I, nor could I. So it's about small tweaks. So you can make small changes in your behavior that have a huge impact. If you're extroverted and you talk too much in meetings, and that, and that's a pretty simple one, right? Figure out a way to keep track of, I should only be talking 30% instead of 60%, or have somebody, just signal you with a nod of the head when you're talking too much. Or any other kinds of things. And we can come up with specific behaviors that you think will actually have a major impact, and are something that you're not aware of right now that you're doing and that needs to change.
Yes. Well, how do you suggest, especially, so what I've seen is the higher you go in an organization, the less people give you feedback.
Right.
And until there becomes this kind of event, and you're really called out, that senior leaders especially can continue to go with their blind spots until they can't anymore. So
Right.
how do you suggest at that level that is it asking for feedback? Is it being aware? Is it having a coach to make sure that they are not running into these blind spots?
Yeah. I mean, it does take a commitment on your own part to be able to be vulnerable, and to be able to feel like you need to, improve. And that's why I said earlier in the beginning, not talking about weaknesses, but talking about its blind spots. I mean, everybody knows everybody has blind spots. I mean, there's, that's nothing you should be ashamed of. So, it's first getting your mind around the fact that it's okay. And then it's really creating a culture of feedback in the company. It's very hard to do what you just suggested if the culture of the company doesn't support that. And most of my work, quite frankly, was with senior level leaders, CEOs, and senior leaders, and that's where I'd start. I mean, they have a huge opportunity for everybody in their company by being able to create a culture of feedback, and it starts with them. I'll often get a leader say, "Oh, I need to have a difficult performance conversation with somebody and really give them tough feedback. And can you help me do that?" And my first uh, response to them is, "Well, have you shared tough feedback that you've received? Have you modeled how to do that? I mean, if you want to have somebody do it, you need to show it first, and you need to be self-disclosure breeds self-disclosure. So if you're vulnerable, you'll breed vulnerability in others. So that's where it starts. And there's a lot of steps to, and skills to develop, and how to give good feedback and receive good feedback. But it really starts with that ability to be vulnerable. And it doesn't have to be massive. Again, it's just these small changes. And so you can just say, I realize that I get, carried away at times with my emotions, and I get super excited, and I know I take the meeting off a course, and I've had feedback about that. I'm really going to work on that. And here's what I'm going to do. And can you all hold me accountable to that? And often, you try to turn it into something humorous, find some little catchword for it. So it becomes it just takes all the sting out of it, and it becomes something that people can be able to do. And then you can create a culture of that in the company.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing when that can happen. And when the leader goes first, the highest level leader says, "Hey, we're all trying to improve here." And that feedback and accountability, right? Keep me accountable. I want you to tell me. And then when they tell you, make sure you
Right.
let them tell you, right? That's another piece.
Yes.
So I've I want to just go back to motives briefly.
Sure.
So do motives not change over your course of your life? So maybe like at some point you're like, yeah, I'm just trying to climb the ladder, and yeah, I'll manage this team, but whatever. Um, how often do motives change over a person's career?
Right. So motives really are, I mean, needs, drives, and at some level, I mean, I think they are baked in a lot of ways. Um, And but if you think about it, they also totally change with stress. I mean,
Mhm.
the fight flight response, that's a motive response, right? It should I run or should I hide? Everything has been constricted to those two choices because you're under so much stress, and nothing else really counts. Being friendly or other things that you would normally do as a person, part of your personality. So that's number one to be aware of. When you're under stress, your motives are going to constrict, and they're going to constrict to those most survivability kinds of motives. As you're We're often motivated by multiple things at the same time at different levels of intensity. And so again, it's back to awareness. Am I aware right now that this decision that I'm about to try to make, I have multiple feelings about it? I'm motivated by an altruistic feeling of doing what's best for mankind. I'm motivated by a financial drive of what's going to get move the numbers in my division. I'm motivated by an affiliation drive of making sure everybody feels good about it, and so on. So again, it's being able to be focused on what your motives are. The organizational psychologist David McClellan, a number of years ago, talked about three core motives that are in business, and I think this is a good place to start for people. And those are the motives for power, or need for power, need for affiliation, and need for achievement. Um, and we probably all have set points in those. We're, 80, 20, 20, 80, 10, 10, or 30, 30, 30, whatever it is, about those different motives. So it's knowing that inside yourself and looking at your past history of what decisions did you make? Why did you do what you did? Motives are why questions. Why am I doing this? And we often ascribe motives to other people, maybe incorrectly, but it's what we see. Oh, she's only talking because she loves to be in the limelight, and that's why she grabbed the mic and is talking to the team right now. It has nothing to do with our performance. It's just about her need for fame. Or he only cares about only cares about money. It's only about power, and him. Or somebody's totally motivated by achievement. I just want to be the best at what I'm doing, and that's all that really counts. Or get the right answer here. So knowing what those things are, what are driving us, as well as all these personal motives that we develop just in our own psychology as we grow up. Certain things are more important to us, the kind of families we grew up in. So it starts there, and that's where you begin to ask questions. Back to the trait thing, am I overdoing a particular motive right now? Am I so focused on, achievement that I'm really crowding out, I should be really meeting with the team or walking around. I shouldn't just walk into work and sit down at my desk. I should really have some socialization. So again, it's looking at that kind of balance and what fits the right situation.
Yeah, I'll have to look into those a little bit more, but when you went through that, I was like, yes, for me, it's achievement, right? Like, and it can get in the way of personal relationships sometime when I'm just trying to, okay, I got to get this done, and I kind of forget to counter my language, right?
Yep.
Um, so, all right, so putting all the blind spots together, some of these you said are just fundamental to who you are. And so when you think about somebody in an organization, you're overcorrecting on some of your strengths. How do you know if it is something you need to adjust?
Hmm.
Or do you say, hey, this organization just isn't a fit for me because I'm not able to leverage my strengths?
Right. Yeah, I don't know that anybody can give what's the right answer, but that's the right question, right? And it's the right question to begin to really focus on, and figure out. I mean, I have worked with people who, I worked with somebody who was they're they're they were great at being rebellious. They were great at talking truth to power. They were great at being able to really ask the important questions, and not in a fearless kind of way. Um, well, that was also stopping their career path, right? I mean, that's the rebellious one. Does she really want to be part of the senior management level? I don't think so. So coming to terms with that, of liking that about themselves, and yet also wanting to rise in the company. I had a client where she had to basically find a way to sit on some of those pick her battles in a much more careful way, and not get so much gratification always at saying the thing that, gets everybody riled up. That was meeting her own personal motives for that and a desire to be rebellious. And it wasn't, and at some level, it was curtailing her ability to move ahead. So we worked on how she could make some changes in terms of that. And, she was going to become part of the power structure that she was railing against, right? So how do you do that and change your identity to fit? So it's complex, but that's the process, is just kind of as you teed up the question, it's getting to what's the real issues here that first I need to be aware of. What are the issues? What's the blind spots? What's going on here? And now do the hard work of trying to figure out, come to the right decision about where the change needs to happen.
Yeah, it's internal work. I was reading one of the articles you contributed to and talking about a leader who is more introverted, but in a CEO role, and how you worked with her to, like you just said with this other example, how do you still make it work for you, but still
Yep.
do your job, right? But that comes from inside. You want to have to be part of that role and be, like you were saying with this other lady, part of the machine. Like, are you okay with that?
Well, and the other thing about it, everything is so organic. Everything's changing all the time. The company is changing over time. The roles are changing over the time. You're changing. So, we all have to do this, right? I mean, you may be a perfect fit, or your skills may be a perfect fit, or may not be a perfect fit, and may be a perfect fit 2 years from now in that, as of where the company's moving. And so that's, to me, what's kind of exciting about life, is that it all is very dynamic.
Yes, yes. So if you could mentor an early leader over coffee tomorrow,
Hmm.
and you're with the context of your book, what would you encourage them to start doing and stop doing?
Um, yeah, so maybe a couple ways to answer. So I wrote this book because, I mean, the most I could do is work with one person at a time over my career, and I've done a lot of that. And I really feel like I've learned a lot from all of that, and I wanted to have an impact in a much larger kind of way. Um, and so the book is the first step. I think if somebody can read the book, I think they will start asking some questions. Hopefully, it creates some self-awareness, where it wasn't there before. With a test publisher, we've created a blind spotting test. So that's the next step. There's a QR code in the back of the book to buy that, and that'll help narrow that down. So I think, given your little scenario, I would hope the person that I'm sitting down to have coffee with read the book and maybe took the test. And so they already say, I'm wondering about these 3 or 4 things that I think, and right now, this is what's bothering me at work, or this is where my challenge is, or this is where I want to go in my career. So it's what they're feeling about what needs to change, or what they want to go for. It's that feedback from the book and the test about where their blind spots might be, and what I'd be trying to work with them on. And let's narrow this down to the 1 or 2 things right now that you're probably not that you could become aware of and adjust in your behavior, that'll get you to solve whatever that career problem is, that you're looking at, or the interpersonal problem at work, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and what I heard from that is take initiative, right? Take initiative in your career, do some reading and
Yes.
assessing and questioning, right?
Yeah, I mean, the book is it's all we're all super complicated, right? And what is it really? Is it my intellect? Is it my traits? I mean, all these things influence each other. So the purpose of the book and the test are really just to provide some categories and say, here's where to focus your attention. Otherwise, it just feels like a buzzing confusion about what to do.
Yeah. Well, thinking again about any leader really, because every leader I've ever worked with, they're busy, they're overwhelmed, there's not a lot of time. They have to take the time for reflection. But are there any, because you talked about small tweaks, are
Yep.
there any small habits they could get into to with their reflection, whether it's a daily or weekly practice that they could take on?
Yeah, that's where all this should go. I mean, I really, coaching comes from sports, and if you look at sports, the further you go in sports, the more coaching you get. Right? Elite athletes
Hmm.
have 4 different coaches, helping them with all sorts of aspects of their performance. And so I look at business coaching that way too. It's about performance, and it's about improving your performance. And it is small tweaks. You can change your grip on the golf club a quarter of an inch, and all of a sudden you got 20 more yards on your drive. And that was a small thing, but you had to practice on the driving range, for an entire week for you to get that grip where it feels right for you. So that's the work that I would do with people is, what's the small change? Let's figure out what that new behavior looks like. And it should be something small, something that it's in your skill repertoire. It's something you can do. Now let's talk about when you should do it. So that's, what are the triggers that should tell you that it's time for you to do that, instead of doing your default response that you normally do. I'm going into a meeting. I need to behave different in this meeting. When I start feeling X, I know it usually leads me in the wrong direction. So that's my trigger. And my new behavior is going to be Y, that I'm going to do at that particular time. And exactly what you said. I mean, really, let's chart it. Let's, figure out, the more you can do it. I mean, if it's happens only once a quarter, it's going to be hard for you to develop that into a habit. But if it's something that happens, several times a week, you can definitely do it. And then you can review by the end of the week. Did I do it? How often? What was the result? Maybe that behavior tweak was only about 80% right. I need to do it a little more differently and try the new behavior the next week.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all the small habits help and they do build up. So the golf example is a good one. So, Marty, where can people find out more with you, connect with you, and find out about your book?
Sure. So we've got a website, blindsided.com. You can purchase the book there purchase the book anywhere from wherever you buy your books, audio or ebook or hardcover. The test is there. There's a lot of content there as well. Some of the podcasts that I've done, other written articles and so on. So a lot of material you can find there. I also have an author website, martindubin.com, where some of the same things are available as well.
Okay, I'll link all of those up in the show notes. But Marty, anything to leave the listeners with, anything I may not have asked you, or just any parting thoughts?
Yeah, just overall, businesses, there's so many things in business you can't control. There's so many things in life we can't control. The one thing that we have the most ability to control is how we show up. And if you're feeling like, there's just so much chaos around you and so much that you can't control, this book is really a way for you to start to get a handle on some of the things you can make changes for yourself. And in that way, lead a more effective life.
Well, Marty, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for the conversation.